Great. Well, thank you everyone for making time to meet and talk about this. In case anyone's watching, this is a meeting with representatives from the Camden Library Board of Trustees and the Camden Select Board to talk about design elements for the removal of the Montgomery Dam and the restoration of the river channel. So does everybody know each other, or should we go around and do introductions?
I think we should probably, even just for the benefit of anybody that might be watching too, probably get to do introductions.
All right. Okay, do we want to start Silvio?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Silvio Calabi. I'm a trustee of the Camden Library. I'm a nearly 40-year resident of Camden.
Dave?
Hi, I'm Dave Jackson. I'm the director of Camden Harbor Park and Amphitheater and have been so since 2004.
Kristen?
I'm Kristen Smith and I'm a member of the library board.
Marty?
I'm Marty Wolf and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees at Camden Public Library.
Pat?
Oh, whoops, that's my fault. I muted everyone. I'm requesting to unmute you, Pat. You see down in the bottom. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I'm Pat Jones, and I'm president of the Board of Trustees of the Camden Public Library.
And Matt?
Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Siegel. I'm a Camden Select Board member and Silvio's neighbor. Hello, Silvio.
Oh.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep.
Didn't either.
I know, it happens. The guy with the dog. It's the guy with the dog, Silvio. The guy with the dog.
Okay. Well, hi, Matt. Stop in sometime.
Yeah, we'll do.
Allison?
I'm Allison McKellar. I'm a Camden Select Board member.
Nikki?
I'm Nikki Mayonis, the library's executive director.
And I am Audra Kaler. I'm the Camden town manager. So thank you again, everyone. So the kind of after the introduction, the next item is to do a little bit of an overview of the Coastal Communities Grant. That's the funding source that is funding this project. So the goals of the grant, they're really threefold. These are grants that are made to either communities or regional planning commissions. And the program has sort of three categories that they accept proposals from. So one is ensuring sustainable and vibrant coastal communities. The other is restoring coastal habitats. And then the third one is preparing for coastal storms, erosion, and flooding, as well as coastal hazards. So according to the goals of the grant, this project fits within the two categories of restoring coastal habitats because of the possibility to restore a native fish run, as well as preparing for coastal storms, erosion, and flooding, as well as coastal hazards. So those were the two broad sort of planning categories that this project was deemed to fit within. So within that, the proposal itself, it was broad enough to look at options for both full or partial dam removal, as well as restoring the natural river channel. And as we've gone through different data collection processes along the lines of this project, it sort of became obvious that the full dam removal option was more feasible in terms of meeting some of the outcomes, the original sort of goals of the grant in terms of protection from flooding and coastal storms. And I think that Allison's got a really good video that sort of illustrates that, both in terms of the dam and how the dam connects to Harbor Park. So Allison, would you mind screen sharing and showing that video? Because I think it just gives the group some really good context to kind of see some of the issues that we're trying to address through the grant and what we're hoping to, design an outcome that really takes into consideration this problem.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's helpful too, the grant, it's not just about the goals of the grant, it's that the grant matched so closely with some of these problems that we're already having, that I think are not really that widely understood. I certainly didn't know any of this a few years ago. So this is just sort of like quick example of what the town does to manage the flood risk from the dam, kind of like just in a typical spring rain event. Let's see. Can you guys hear? There's probably no audio, but that's okay. It's just the sound of rushing water, if you're not able to hear.
Longer shifts, like all right. Okay. My router burned up this morning, so I don't know how were you able to see? Whoa, hold on. Were you able to see that? Okay.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
kind of herky jerky, but we got the picture.
Okay. It's on the Town of Camden YouTube channel for anybody that wants to look at it more carefully. But basically, what I wasn't aware of at the beginning of any of this is that we have town staff people going out and opening and closing that with such frequency, and that the sluice way itself really isn't big enough to pass all of that water through. So trying to find a way that there can be less management on the part of the town, or hopefully no active management is, one of the big goals.
Yeah, and I think that this is also, like, from a planning perspective, kind of like a perfect nexus between, like, a piece of infrastructure where we're seeing impacts from overland flooding and increased rain events, as well as sea level rise. That corner of the dam is just such a good, the corner of the wall there, right next to the sluiceway, is just a perfect example of where it's, getting the impacts of river flooding, as well as, higher tides and sea level rise and overtopping from that. So it's just a really good, example of infrastructure that needs to sort of be updated, because it's experiencing two impacts of climate change at once. So that's one of the, the reasons why the town is so interested in it, and why we've received so much support from, our partners at the state and the federal level to look at this. Because if you're talking about resilience to climate change, this is a really good nexus point where it's experiencing the impacts of both, and we're really in a position where we need to look at it and look at sort of the long-term implications of that. So that's sort of the impetus behind the project. So in terms of deliverables, we're looking to get engineering design plans out of this exercise. And we're really at the phase where we're trying to sort of, come up with a design concept that can be brought through to the engineering phase. And we're under some pretty tight timeframes. And a lot of this is kind of driven by the fact that, during the middle of last year, even though we got the grant in 2019, so it was September of 2019 when we were awarded the contract by the state and we started work, everything, sort of shut down shortly thereafter because of COVID. So that's kind of extended the process and has meant that, we're still on schedule, but the timeframes are still tight. So, once again, we really appreciate everybody's help, because I think that, all of us sort of working together and hammering out some of these design elements is going to be great in trying to move this forward. So are there any questions at all on the grant or goals, deliverables, timeframes, anything like that? Silvio?
This is pretty basic. It sounds to me like the town is leaning strongly toward removing the dam, but no decision has been made yet. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that, out of sort of all of the options, and there are a lot of different options that Interfluve looked at in their feasibility study. This was the option where, we didn't know, without going through this particular exercise of doing the design and the engineering, what it would look like or what the cost implications would be, versus, some of the other options that don't entail dam removal, where we have a much better idea of, what we're faced with in terms of what kind of repairs need to be made and what they're going to look like at the end of it. So there were the most unknowns associated with this option, which is why, the select board authorized me to seek out, this funding and go through this process. So even though no decisions have been made about what's ultimately going to happen, this gives us sort of the best information about the implications of this option, so that when, some sort of final decision does need to be made, everybody's clear about, what lies ahead for each.
I mean, just to jump in there a little bit, I think it's really hard to say, the town is leaning towards this or that, because we all know that the way decisions are made in town is, really multi-layered, and none of us individually get to speak for the voters or for the other boards that have decision-making ability. I think it's fair to say that the current town staff were leaning strongly toward putting something, hoping to put something out to voters that would be full dam removal, and that this is an exercise in trying to see what the best design is that we can collectively come up with, so that voters would be in a position to decide whether it's something that's acceptable to them. And so I think that, it's even possible for people to participate in this discussion about, okay, well, if we were going to remove the dam, what would be the best way to do that? What would be the best aesthetic choices? That doesn't mean that there's an expectation even that somebody who participates in that kind of a discussion is saying that they necessarily support dam removal in the long run. I think you can support, if you look at like even the middle school, there are people that said, I don't want to build a new middle school, but if we are going to build one, I think these are some of the things that are important to take into consideration. So I think the base flood, reducing the base flood elevation by the largest amount is what like the real benefit of dam removal is here, that more properties could experience the benefit of lower flood insurance rates. And that's all really complicated stuff, but it's the reason that NOAA and organizations like that are supporting this, that we have the potential here for many properties to reduce the base flood elevation by 8 feet, which means that for some of these buildings, there'll be the difference between whether they can do substantial renovations or not, or the difference between $25,000 in flood insurance and $10,000. So that's all complicated stuff, but it's if you look at the FEMA flood maps and stuff, it's removing the dam as completely as possible is what allows us to bring that flood elevation down and hopefully, let a bunch of property owners experience that benefit. It basically goes all the way back until like the pedestrian bridge, the impact of the Montgomery Dam ends a little bit upstream of the pedestrian bridge by river ducts. So currently all of those buildings, the cutting edge, portions of Boynton McKay, portions of the little back corner of the Lord Camden Inn, House of Logan, the Leather Bench, certainly Mariners, the Smiling Cow, the Psychic Shop, all of those properties, if they are owned by somebody that has to have a mortgage or are going to be sold to somebody that needs to have a federally backed mortgage, they're required to purchase flood insurance, which is very, very, sometimes prohibitively expensive. And so that's, I think, a big part of the reason when people say, well, why are you jumping toward dam removal? Well, we're hoping to find that there's a solution that could be aesthetically pleasing enough to people that we could also, deliver that benefit to these upstream properties.
And I think another thing that's really important from the town's perspective, if we're going to invest in repairing our infrastructure, if we make choices that aren't reducing our base flood elevations and we're not making choices that are in line with best practices in terms of climate change resiliency, that has the ability to impact the town's credit rating, so that when we do go to do work, and this could be on any project in the town of Camden, we're not able to borrow money as inexpensively as we currently are if we're going to do projects that aren't reducing that risk for us. So that's another, consideration that we need to be aware of when we're doing projects in the future, especially ones that where we need to sort of plan for the impacts of climate change around.
I have one more question about sort of the end goal here.
Hold on, it looks like Kristen had her hand up.
Would you jump in?
So I just had a question. I've had a question for a long time back to what Audra originally said about the deadlines and everything. So with the whole COVID thing, I know a lot of government agencies and also are getting kind of a COVID extension or grant extension or COVID relief, those kind of things. Is that something that the town has talked about? And is that something that's possible? Because I feel like a lot of people in town feel like this is happening very quickly. And so to know that there's a deadline, this November deadline, which then means a September deadline for doing certain things. Have you looked at seeing if that deadline could be extended?
This is our COVID extension.
I mean,
Yeah, so it would have originally have been due, around that time last year, but because of COVID, they extended it until November.
And so, but I think that's worth like fleshing out a little bit more, because I do think that there's a difference between fulfilling the requirements, or maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, Audra, but there's a difference between fulfilling the requirements of the grant and getting, the basic engineering to them. And there's a difference between that and being ready to show up with excavators and, having every last detail of things ready to go out to voters. I mean, is there room to talk to the agency and say, we have this all designed, this basic dam removal template. We haven't decided on the landscaping for the vegetation on this part of the seawall or that part of the seawall. I know, for instance, I think this was only needed to cover, the initial grant was only looking at that first part of the seawall that's kind of directly connected to the dam, not the whole seawall all along Harbor Park. But we kind of said, it would make sense. Aesthetically, you wouldn't really do something totally disconnected on one side. And this is an opportunity to, talk to the library board of trustees more and see if we can work together. I mean, is there flexibility for leaving parts of it open to future, if we haven't decided on a pedestrian bridge or on a sort of add-on features?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there'll be more work that needs to be done beyond the grant deadline. And there are certain things that, we have to make decisions on for the purpose of, having design that can be engineered for delivering the grant, especially related to the dam, the river channel, and then just the connecting seawall, the portion that connects to the dam itself. But I think other than that, there are a lot of other things that we can look at that would extend beyond that time frame that we have. And we can, continue having these conversations. And I think that, there are a lot of other sort of amenities that, this group and the broader community might want to talk about that aren't going to be sort of limited to the grant process itself.
I mean, and there's nothing to actually prevent us from making changes in between the period that the grant is, between the grant deadline and then when it would, theoretically go out to voters. I mean, there's nothing that stops us from making a change, is there?
No, we're in no way obligated to, move forward with the construction phase of this project. I mean, it's simply the deliverable is the design and the engineering plan. So, once that happens and the grant's delivered to the funding body, we can go back and make any sort of change that, the town decides is best. Sorry, did somebody have a question? I thought
I think you more or less answered my question, so I withdraw, and it looks like Kristen has her hand up again.
You pretty much answered mine too. I just wanted to know, as long as we fulfill that grant, I mean, this could get voted down and you still would have all the grant money. It's just, you need to fulfill it by that deadline, but that might just be a moot point and nothing might happen with that engineering. And right.
Yep, absolutely. And that, I mean, quite honestly, that happens all the time with projects, and that's kind of the purpose of some of these grants, is that, of course, they hope that you move forward to the construction phase, but they know full well that, a lot of this is an exercise to answer some unknown questions that you might have about a project. Sometimes you get to the end of this and maybe it's a cost issue, or maybe it's a, feasibility from an engineering or structural perspective. And I'm not saying that's the case with this particular project, but, there's certainly others that they've gone through the same sort of exercise and found out that, what they propose is not what they ultimately want to do.
Or abutting property owners too, that's the other thing that could stop stuff.
So I just wanted to, not beat a dead horse, but I just want to make sure that everybody from the library crew is clear, as I think I am, that the plan right now is we are never going to get to the level of detail talking about a partial removal, for instance, of the dam, as I know that I think the grant I think might have covered, but so we are never going to get to that level of detail talking about that option, or perhaps even what it would look like if we rebuilt the seawall. And then the thought then at this point is, once you have the design for the complete removal of the dam, that most likely anyway, if the select board okays it, that is the only option that will go to the ballot next year at some point. Is that correct? Because I've listened very carefully a couple of times to your conversations about this at the select board, and I am a little confused. And so I'm sure others are as well. Is your idea that we're going to flesh this option out in whatever version we can get, level of detail we can get? It's going to fulfill the terms of the grant, and assuming that all goes well, that at some point next year, that is what will be brought to the voters.
I think we have to be really careful about the language that we use and kind of making sure that we're all using the same words for the same things. Rebuilding of the seawall. Like, to me, the seawall has to be rebuilt. There are a lot of different, whether the seawall is rebuilt in exactly the way that it is right now. I don't think anybody is saying that it should be done exactly the same. There are people that are saying, why aren't you simply, raising the seawall? And I think we can explore, well, are there places in the seawall that can just are good candidates for simply just being raised, and then other portions of the seawall that might be, a tiered effect. So the seawall, and I think that's a big part of this. The designs that we initially showed kind of left that all pretty vague because we didn't want to get too far down that road. It's kind of just a vegetated shoreline, but I don't think anybody actually thinks that's what can happen there. So there's going to need to be a lot of granite there. We have to keep that big, the vegetated bank that has the apple tree and the paths and things, or the paths that aren't really paths. That needs to be held in place. There is a retaining wall, but that's there's a lot of flexibility in how that seawall might be done. I think we probably should. We can't go to a situation where we put out to voters, do you want option A or do you want option B? Legally, that's problematic for many different reasons. I think we should do more fleshing out of, for example, partial removal. What does that mean? Partial removal can mean a lot of different things. In some communities, they've left portions of the dam in place to provide like a lookout point or a pedestrian bridge, but the river retaining portion is taken out. Historic preservation and choosing which features should be maintained, that's all definitely part of what we need to talk about. I think whether we get to a point where the select board feels like, yeah, we have something that's ready to go for voters at any point is still an unknown. I don't imagine that we would consider it wise to put out something to voters that does not have the support of the library board of trustees. That would be, how would we even do that? Because it would impact Harbor Park, and it just makes no sense. So we can't put something out to voters that we can't legally do. So whether we get there or not kind of depends on what this group can, which direction we could go. I think we need to do a better job sort of walking through what are some of the reasons why it sounds like, Audra and I are like, well, clearly dam removal is the right choice. I think that's like the vibe that people are getting that's kind of feels scary and overwhelming and too fast. And, to kind of walk everybody through, okay, these are the reasons, some of the reasons why partial dam removal didn't feel like it met the goals, and then see which parts of those things you agree with or don't.
I think to be really clear, Nikki, we can't put out like a multitude of options to voters. Like what the select board decides to put to voters, it's got to be like a straight up or down, yes or no. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think that any of us can speak with any certainty as to what exactly the select board is going to decide is the ultimate option that gets put to voters, because I think there's a lot of different inputs that they need before they even get to a point where they would feel comfortable moving anything forward.
I don't know if Matt wants to say anything too. I've kind of been domineering, but I'm sure he'll raise his hand.
I think Marty's had her hand up for a while.
So simply put, that if this went to voters, it says to voters that the library endorses it, yes?
I mean, I don't think that anything would be put to voters unless the library did endorse it.
Because, I attended the last one of those 3 discussion meetings. I've done a lot of reading. I see that on table 10 from the interfluve report, 60% of these options maintain the existing Harbor Park, 60%. And Harbor Park is in the crosshairs of this concept, totally. And my job is to protect and preserve Harbor Park. And this calls for addressing a deteriorating seawall, and I understand that. And in doing so, we need to meet the challenges of rising sea level and the probability of increased storms. I understand that. But we need to preserve the Olmsted design. And we need to preserve the park as it was put together and approved by Mary Louise Curtis Bach. And it's that simple. That's my job. And it's really difficult for me to embrace a concept that has a river running through with no seawall and vegetation at all. So that's where I stand as a trustee.
Dave?
Hi. There is maybe another step involved here that I should maybe introduce at this point. I've consulted the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, with whom I've dealt a number of times in the last 12 or 14 years. That's the commission, the agency in the state that's responsible for historic preservation, as the name implies. And I found that there's one woman on that staff who in particular has been following this discussion since 2019. Her name is Megan Rideout. And I want to quote from an email that she sent me. At this time, it's unknown to our office what type of permitting or funding would be associated with the proposed project. And a preferred alternative has not been submitted to our office for further review or comment by either the town or Interfluve. But if the project has federal permitting or funding through a federal agency, such as the Army Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or NOAA, then the proposed project would trigger Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. As amended, Section 106 is the process by which the lead federal agency will need to take into consideration any effects or impacts that the proposed project would have on historic resources located in or adjacent to the project. At this time, it's unknown at this office if the proposed project will need federal permitting or not. But that is a step that once there is a design, like that we may trigger this section 106. So and that includes, if you look that up online, it includes public comment. So the question in my mind is, okay, so do you seek that public comment before you go to voters, or do you seek it after the vote, which could be negate the whole process?
So this is one of the things that Matt Bernier from NOAA spoke to at one of the listening sessions. Section 106 and the Maine Historic Preservation Commission, and they are very frequently involved in dam removal projects. This has been part of the initial Montgomery Dam feasibility study references this. It is very well known that this is an aspect, and I think it should really serve as some level of protection for all of you. It's definitely a part of the process that cannot be escaped. That's why Matt Bernier was saying, there is no scenario where we would be allowed to do something there that would completely obliterate the historic nature of things. They don't allow that to happen. It does have historic designation. It does add more layers to the process. And of course, it would that public comment, some of it has been ongoing, but if we're not at that comes for the construction phase, or we're not at the point, we're early in this. We're seeking a lot of input in this initial design phase, but we're nowhere near actually doing something. We're not even at the point where we can ask the Maine Historic Preservation Commission to weigh in. That's what we're doing with you all.
Yeah, we're way below. I mean, we do a lot of projects where we're working with Maine Historic Preservation, and yeah, this is like so much earlier in the process than when we would ever, need to reach out to them.
I mean, they've been reached out to. They provided comments for the initial feasibility study. They said exactly what Dave said, that it will require review, for all of the reasons that we all know.
I was just curious, at what point, obviously it has to be after a design has been decided on, but at what point relative to the vote do we take that step?
Well before. This is part of that process, but formally and legally, just as anything that goes to voters, the select board is required to hold a public hearing. And so, that's the bare minimum before anything gets put to voters, but nobody's looking to do the bare minimum here.
All right, so are there any more sort of questions on the grant and deliverables and the project? And what we're seeking your feedback on right now?
Do we want to look at a diagram of the dam at all, so that we can all kind of be clear on the parts of it, and the reason why Harbor Park would be impacted is because the dam is in Harbor Park. And so, just as the town's failure if we didn't do anything with the dam, eventually the river would just flow down through Harbor Park if we don't maintain it, because practically speaking, if we could, maybe give the dam to the library, and the library could keep it so that they could preserve part of Harbor Park, but we don't really have a choice. We have to work together, because like there's vegetation growing into the dam right now that is coming from Harbor Park. That undermines the structural integrity of the dam. No dam lasts really forever. And the force of that water is pushing down through Harbor Park. So we like kind of have to figure out a way to, I don't know, does everybody feel like they know all the parts of the dam? Are we all using the same words? Is it helpful to look at a diagram at all? Or
I think I'd like to see the diagram.
Yeah, me too.
So. Okay, so and some of this terminology probably changes, but these are the, the basic words that are used in the reports. The main part of the dam, can you see my cursor or not?
Yes.
Okay. The main part of the dam is here. That's the tallest part of it. The bedrock kind of goes down like this. This was the site of like an original falls location where they built the dam, but it kind of goes down like this. And one good thing about this, no matter what ends up happening, we have through the grant, we've learned a lot about where the bedrock is, what the soil makeup is. There's a lot that will be, I think, useful to us no matter what happens, but basically goes down like this and then kind of like over here starts to come back up again. And then all of this, the select board gave Mary Louise Curtis Bach permission to fill in a section of the intertidal zone around the time that that Harbor Park was created. So this is all fill that's kind of like sandy fill that was brought in. But so the main part of the dam is here. The dam spillway is here. And this part here is kind of like the smallest part of the dam. It gets to be only like 6 inches tall on top of the bedrock over here. And so that's what forces, having the water at this elevation is what forces this water to come down over on the public landing side. This pond here is referred to with all dams as an impoundment. This is where the gate is. This is the sluiceway where the water comes out when you open the gate. And then this is where it starts, forms into the seawall. Along here is another, it's just a retaining wall for the bank. But that kind of shows why, initially we said, well, full dam removal maybe isn't possible because this is Harbor Park and nobody wants to mess with that. We were hoping that the seawall and all of this could just, was going to hold on like at least another 10 years. It wasn't all that bad. As we've been paying more attention to climate change, we've realized that the urgency of this situation in Lower Harbor Park is, a lot more than anybody realized. So doing nothing here isn't really an option. The option of protecting, one of the things that I've been hearing is, okay, we want to protect Harbor Park, and maybe that could be just raising things up. So the reason that we went to trying to think about how we might be able to have a more staggered or tiered seawall along this part that could kind of dovetail with the river channel coming down through here is because in order to raise up all of this, it's not structurally, it's not simply going to be a matter of just being able to do that. It would all need to be rebuilt, and then we would have to have, we'd end up with a much, much steeper drop off here. that presents a safety concern, and then would trigger, you know, railings and a lot of things needing to be brought up to code that, you know, might be, you know, not something that people would enjoy either. So that's just kind of like the basic things of, there is no like just keep everything the same option. So that I will.
Allison, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So first off, where it says gate, the word gate, not the gate itself, there's a retaining wall in that spot that would stay. Is that correct? Holding up that part of Harbor Park? Yes, right in there.
Yes. Yep.
So that,
yeah.
and then as far as the dam goes, the gate that's across the water, if you remove the gate, is the dam just then like another retaining wall? Or is there more structure in that, say you removed the, you know, you kept the retaining wall where the gate is, and you kept the dam just where it says dam as a gate, as a retaining wall, took out the spillway and everything. Would that work as a retaining wall? Is that a?
Well, that is, yeah, sure. It's very similar in construction to this retaining wall that kind of forms the bank of the river underneath the psychic chop here and then along here. It's where the dam would be sort of most prone to leakage. It's has a lot of issues, so it's not in the kind of condition that it could just be left necessarily, but it could, you know, portions of it could be left as a really anything would have to be it could be rebuilt and left, but just taking out the gate, so the gate is a wooden structure that has actually, it's had to be rebuilt every 10 or 15 years, and that so when we were initially given the dam, it was right after a repair had been done. If you take it out, water will just flow through the sluiceway. You could remove the gate and just like cap it basically and make it all a wall. Because of the way that the bedrock is shaped, I don't think that would be a very aesthetically pleasing thing without doing some modifications here, because what you'd have is sort of the bedrock comes down like over here, and then you'd have this wall. So it would force, if the water couldn't get out the sluiceway, it would very much reduce some of the flooding impacts. Not quite as much as full dam removal and letting the water go all the way over here, but it would force it into like this kind of narrow channel there, which I think wouldn't look very good in terms of thinking like what people like about water cascading over large portions of bedrock. We have been told by that, you know, bedrock modification, since it has already been modified a lot, doing a little bit of bedrock modification is, you know, a possibility. And it might be a possibility to, you know, make aesthetically pleasing fish passage, or the other thing would be, they did kind of identify in these, I'll show one of these designs that kind of maintains like it creates like a second island here, basically, where, let's see, this is kind of interesting here because it shows, this isn't what I was going to show you, but this shows before, you know, when the dam was there already, but Harbor Park hadn't been filled in down here. So, you know, this is the concrete portion that we see today. And then, you know, a lot of this is kind of like buried, and what you can see actually right down here, this is water leaking out through that wall, which is the same issue that we're actually prone to having happen now, if the dam were to start failing. But going through to the concept designs. This is basically, this area here is kind of like the location of the gate and sluiceway now. This shows, you know, it would kind of create like another island. There would be opportunities here to maybe leave or move some of that granite structure to make it more like something, you know, people really like walking on, it seems like, on that sluiceway. Now we're not, that is one other thing that the insurance company, we are not supposed to be letting anybody anywhere near that dam. And we've avoided putting signs up that say, keep off, because it would be probably politically unpopular. But anyway, leaving some of that structure might be possible, and having a bridge, or there are a lot of different opportunities for, you know, creating places for people to be. I don't know if that answers your question. And some of these things are things that we can, as we people have questions, we can ask in a subsequent meeting. We can ask the engineers, or maybe even somebody from NOAA, to come in and say what is feasible or what isn't.
Allison, to go back to your drawing that labels the different portions of the dam and so on.
Sure.
Yeah. Right. When you speak of removing the dam, I assume you mean removing the area that's called the spillway as well, or am I wrong?
Yeah, so that would be the dam spillway would be part of that.
Okay. I mean, in my mind, the dam runs all the way across to the elbow on the left side there.
Yes, yep, it does. And you know, one of the things that had been in the Camden Comprehensive Plan before was like low, you know, they wanted to, it's long been known that the dam should just be lowered, at least, because and so that was part of that was going to get removed just to try to slightly lessen the flood impact. But I don't know if it was realized when they decided to do that, that would cause the water to not go over here in exactly the same way. It could still form a waterfall by traveling, you know, a different path a little lower down. But even partial removal would change the way that the water flows across the bedrock also. You know, so trying to understand which parts of this are the most important to people can help us. A lot of it might be easy to achieve because it doesn't take much to, you can see these little parts of the bedrock, it changes so much the way the water flows depending on what visual effects you want to try to maintain. Part of the spillway could be left in place too as like a pedestrian bridge, or depending on what people wanted to do in this area. If Harbor Park were to be kind of expanded, lost a little bit here, but then expanded to over here.
To be effective in flood mitigation, how much of which parts of what we're seeing here has to be removed?
Well, the full removal scenario from the report talks about certainly the lowest part. What that does is it reduces the base flood elevation by about 8 feet. There are theoretically other ways to achieve that if we wanted to be really like this is getting away a little bit from what we're doing with the grant, but if we wanted to imagine a scenario where there was just no chance ever that this could be touched, or we're just going to reinforce all of this, you know, you could theoretically chisel out enough of the bedrock to achieve that lower flood elevation in a different way. You know, and maybe you'd let the river come along, you know, some of this, but it's, you know, there are other ways to bring that down. The other problem that we're having, just to keep in the back of everybody's mind, is that the dinghy dock system and the town floats is a pretty big issue with the flow of the river. And so part of what Interflu has been studying is the hydrology of different scenarios. We know that currently I'll get into maybe we'll go with Marty's question, and then I can show you a diagram of the harbor and show you where we're having pretty big impacts on the float system currently because of the sluiceway and the way it rockets into the dinghy dock system.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the sluiceway. Now there's the big wall that runs along the green line on the right of the word sluiceway.
Mm-hmm.
The big wide wall. That's the one the people sit on.
Right.
Okay. So that wall's there. Then we have the seawall. So I guess what part of Harbor Park is flooding? I can see that at the base here of this picture. You can see where the boat haul out space is covered. And we know it comes up over the benches and it comes all the way to the bank.
Mm-hmm.
In extreme high tides and storm events. I've seen them too. And so what we don't want to do is build a bigger seawall that just holds water. That's not what we want to do. That's not what doesn't make sense.
Right.
So I understand how that part of Harbor Park needs to be altered. The seawall needs to be addressed. And a tiered seawall, I've looked at pictures of them in different places in the world where they've done them, all sorts of tiered seawalls, look like a possibility. Then sea level goes up, you've got the tiered walls in place. When the level drops, you've got the seawalls in place. So I'm going up the hill here and I'm walking toward the sluiceway and I'm saying, okay, what's flooding there in that area to the right of the word sluiceway or seawall?
So that is an area that is in the flood zone. That is not, typically flooding. There are issues. There have been issues in the past with water bubbling up because of leaks in the dam,
Okay.
or because of there was like a water main at one point. So I haven't seen this personally, but I was reading old articles that talked about it. But it is in the path of the what they called like the base flood. So in a situation where we got a major rain event, you would have water coming up, just as they identified that the Mariners and Camden Deli and all of these buildings are in the flood zone. You would have water also coming up over this portion of the dam. One of the things that the Olmsteads did when they designed this section of Harbor Park, they were told they have to work around the dam. Dam removal wasn't being considered then. It was still producing hydropower, but they raised this portion of the dam so that it wouldn't, water would be more likely to go here than here. But that doesn't mean it's not still a risk. So when we talk about like
driving my car is a risk. Sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. And that we do. I agree with you that once we can define sort of what the known risks are, and we all make decisions all the time about what's, the town operates the toboggan chute is one of my favorite examples. So we do have to decide, what is worth it and what isn't. Are there ways to avoid this risk, or are certain things kind of too valuable to us? In order to be able to allow people to continue to be, insurance companies are becoming more and more aware of these things and tracking down more and more. And so in order to be able to allow people to still be on this structure in the way that they like to be, we're going to have to make some changes.
So we're taking the wall out so people don't climb on it? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying we can't really continue to, that wall could theoretically stay. It would be nice if it didn't have to be considered a dam. You know, if you had some water, if it were a pedestrian overlook. What makes this meet the definition of being a dam is that it has an operable gate.
Yeah.
And all of these things.
Yeah.
So
I'm not.
somebody could be sucked in. I mean, it's not a theoretical risk. It is look at like low head dams and drowning events. It does happen. Being sucked into that sluiceway is.
I'm not arguing the dam at all. I don't want to talk about the dam. I'm talking about the sluiceway, the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at what part of Harbor Park is not flooding at high tides and storm surges, and what part of the seawall needs to be addressed in order to protect and care for the park. What needs to be addressed and what doesn't.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at. And I have to remember that Back Bay was also fill, but we're not removing those historical townhomes in Boston so we can recover Back Bay. So I just want to be really clear about what I see as a big hunk of park that theoretically is not being affected by sea level rise and increased storm events. And I see the part of park that is. And so how do we address, as a trustee in care of the park, how do we make decisions around protecting our park from this increased sea level issue and increased storm events? That's what I'm looking at. That's all. I just
it's
clear about.
Go take a look at the back of that dam when next time you're in Harbor Park. Walk around to the back of the dam and you'll see. We should have a conversation. The trees shouldn't be there. You're not supposed to have vegetation growing around.
And that's giving the vegetation.
But look at it and you'll see. You might get a sense of the type of maintenance that will be required and what the amount of energy and maintenance needed to try to redirect the course of water.
And I'm not arguing dam or no dam. I'm just arguing don't touch my wall. That's it.
Right. It would be nice if the dam weren't right and like they hadn't built Harbor Park, like if the dam were just slightly in a different spot.
So I guess, Marty, I think that's really good feedback. So like that you'd like to see if we're able to sort of preserve that corner where the dam is sort of granite blocks and it connects to that sluiceway. If it's possible to sort of preserve that area that's sort of directing the river away from that corner of the park, is that possible from a hydraulic perspective, given the removal of that concrete spillway?
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. No. So that's really good feedback. So, that's something that we can sort of like look at a little bit more because, maybe that is like a viable option for us. But I'm not the engineer working on this, so I don't know, but that's something that we can certainly sort of look at. Is that a possibility? Given sort of like, the hydrology of that area.
Yeah, I think that's something that, other trustees are going to have opinions about, and I'll be quiet now. My point is, if we don't have to touch a part of Harbor Park to deal with seawall and sea level rise and increased storm events, then let's not.
Yeah, and and there are going to be, areas like that, like maybe potentially that where we might be able to do that, but then, there may be areas where it might not look like, it might not be like directly flooding, but just sort of given, the way that the river needs to align and sort of given future planning that we need to do for sea level rise, we might need to sort of look at other options. But certainly that's, that's the kind of thing that's good for us to hear, so we can figure out, well, what are the choices that we might be able to make around that.
Did you all get the same letter that we got from the watershed school?
Yes. Well, I've seen it, but I think I might have seen it in the paper.
Will Galloway had said he had a little trouble finding, and I've actually gotten this feedback from quite a few people, that it's not clear how to contact all of the trustees. Maybe I know people say that about the select board too, and it's probably it's buried somewhere on our website, but
Actually, everybody did get it. I sent it.
Oh, they did.
You sent it to me and I sent it out to everybody, all the trustees. So it's not a problem.
great. Is that a good way for people to contact everybody? Is just send it to you and have you
It
forward
is,
it?
I think it's the easiest way, honestly. Yeah, I do.
Do we want to look at a few different examples of things and see what people like or don't like, or
Sure.
let's see. Just share my screen here and I know one of the things that Marty had mentioned in one of the conversations was, maybe we could do field trips to places, and I really like that idea and would love to follow up. I've spent lots of time sort of scouring different things on the internet, none of which are like exact. I'm sometimes scared to, show any of this because I haven't seen anything that's like, oh, this is exactly what we want for Harbor Park, but maybe there are sort of elements of different things. This is kind of just one example of the stepped approach. One of the design philosophies that keeps coming up is kind of trying to create spaces that are designed to flood. One of the Olmsted principles was to, build off of the natural assets of a place. And so, they used to call it Shorefront Park. And I don't know if anybody on the board knows when that name got changed, but all of the drawings and everything was, all shorefront. And so, one of the things in the watershed school letter was, talking about sort of the beauty of that intertidal zone and the fact that Harbor Park is the only place that you can go, right in a downtown and be able to see high tide and low tide and all the types of sea life that, you can look underneath kelp right in downtown Camden. And so, if we can find a way to have the park be, those parts that are going to flood sometime, if we can kind of make it so that's not just, a hard boundary line for the park, you can enjoy all of it when we're not having a really high tide event. But when we do have a really high tide event, it's like, well, that's just the way it's meant to be. It's not a disaster. It's just designed to be that way. So,
Allison, I think I've said this to you before, but my children grew up on High Street, and the only part of Harbor Park that ever interested them, other than as a sledding hill in the winter, was when the tide was low, and they could go down there, hop over the wall, and climb around on the rocks and in the seaweed and in the sand and the mud. So I'm already somewhat predisposed to rethinking the boundaries of Harbor Park and having the lower end of Harbor Park extend out into the tidal zone. To me, that would just add a new dimension to Harbor Park and make it all that much more interesting.
I'm going to have to speak up there. I'm sorry, Sylvia, but I have to disagree with you in just looking at the design and reading Mary Louise Curtis Bach's letters. And she was very much in favor of squared stone and green grass behind. And I think that while I can understand children wanting to play in the tidal zone, it's not what she had in mind.
yeah, I mean, and this is a good debate to be having. And this is kind of what the National Association of Olmsted Parks has been framing as these, they're hosting all of these really interesting talks. If you go on their YouTube channel, this Olmsted 200 stuff, and inviting many different speakers and kind of looking at the Olmsted values and how we evolve in the face of climate change. And not everybody agrees. And there's really no better legacy to that designer than to be arguing about what makes public spaces special. And one thing it's very clear is I've had so many people talk to me about this, and I've spent more time now down there than I ever have growing up, hours literally every day. And so I take people's pictures in front of the waterfall and and I can definitely see different people appreciate different things about Harbor Park. And one thing that Mary Louise Curtis Bach did is she hired the Olmsted design firm to do so many projects. Everything she was ever involved in, she had them involved with. And so I do think it's kind of important that we try to honor that legacy too, that she didn't do the design work all herself, but she invested in this at the time, kind of fairly radically progressive landscape design firm. But
I also, it doesn't seem like necessarily what Marty said and Sylvia were saying are incompatible, because, Marty, you were kind of saying earlier how you understood that, part of that sort of filled area is already, it's already flooding and it's already sort of, falling victim to sea level rise and then the overland flooding. So, maybe that's the, that area we can look at for, both reclaiming as part of the intertidal zone and also, like Silvio saying, kind of like that stepped area where it's able to flood to some extent.
Yeah, I just want to chime in one more time. Like, I see children playing, the area where the boat haul out area is. I mean, that was, Mary Louise wanted that to stay put because it was purposeful. That had a purpose to the citizens of Camden. That's where I see young people going down and playing in the low tide. It's great to have them all. So make a stepped thing so the kids can get in there, but you need to have the stone. You can't just have a mud flat. But I'm all for kids on the mud. I'm all for kids in the intertidal zone. Don't get me wrong. But we need clean lines. Neat, clean, and green.
Oh, okay. I don't think we're disagreeing so much as I think the granite is awesome, and the cut granite, and even from a habitat perspective, if it's not like grouted in between every single thing, then that's what kind of eliminates some habitat. But you can see the way that there's nothing incompatible about cut granite with the intertidal zone also. So I think that's a really like hearing you say it like that is really useful, that like clean lines of cut squared granite. It's hard to not like that. I mean, we all, I think this is some of that same philosophy, as opposed to what you see some people doing. Some places is more of just like these stacked boulders. But what I think I'm hearing is, maybe less of this kind of thing and more, this kind of thing.
Yeah, I have some notes here from 1951 when they did the seawall. It used to be just rubble, and they built it up the way we see it today. Is that the wall was to be uncoursed ashlar, which meant that the stone should be squared up so that they could be laid with horizontal beds and square ends, even though the horizontal courses would not run through continuously as on the old park wall. So there's some really specific design things, that they were looking at when they built the original wall.
I think I was talking about the seaward side of Harbor Park, extending it down into the intertidal zone. If you talk about the landward side, I too am. If you've seen my lawn, Marty, I'm a fan of grass and stone as well. But instead of a vertical wall that's ashlar blocks stacked one atop the other, I see them maybe to accommodate sea level rise and periodic flooding, see that wall granite block stepped up and back toward Atlantic Avenue.
Absolutely, yes.
Great. This is perfect. This is exactly the sort of feedback we want from all of you. Thank you.
This shows a little bit more of a hybrid, but it's interesting to hear discussion of the boat launch. In the original designs, that was for town float storage, and they got to leave their town floats there all winter long, which I promise we will never try to do. But would there be interest in, people ask all the time, if there's a way to get their kayak into the harbor. There's kayak access to the harbor is like a kind of a constant frustration. We let people buy dinghy permits and tie them up at the dinghy dock, but that's it. We've never succeeded as a town in finding a place even for kayak racks. This part here did remind me a little bit of the sort of boat launch area of Harbor Park. Would there, and when in the past, when it's been brought up, like, could there be kayak racks over by, I'm seeing some shaking heads. So for you, Marty, you would want to keep kayaks from you don't want people dragging their kayaks down through Harbor Park.
Well, I don't care if they carry their kayaks through Harbor Park. I don't want to see racks of kayaks being stored in Harbor Park or anywhere near Harbor Park. They're an eyesore, and
There's a great spot at Steam Landing that has a kayak rack.
A kayak rack on C Street. I know what they look like.
Okay.
Maybe that's part of the redesign of the town landing on the other side of Harbor Park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's nice about Harbor Park is it does have that. It's the only place that does have kind of that gradual entrance. And so what we've done that's what we could, if you look at the public landing, that's what could happen to Harbor Park with sea level rise, is just the raising up of the seawall, and you wouldn't have that like gentle drop in. But I agree, people can just drag their kayaks down through. I've done it before. If I really wanted to launch from Harbor Park, it's possible. This is the Machias River, and it was the site of major dam removal. It's called Bad Little Falls Park. And for this dam removal, it was, it's a bigger river than Megunticook, but it has a lot of the same features in terms of the really rocky bedrock entrance to the bay. And the water, so this here used to be the dam. And it was a big one. And so it, this whole area behind it was just a pond. And then there was another section of the dam over here. So similar kind of in that like L shape a little bit. And for them, dam removal was really, I think that was when it had been partially removed. This is from one of the lookouts, and it's also tidally influenced. So it does rise and fall, and the fish can get up more easily at high tide than at low tide. It's still one of those places where it's really a fight for them. But they turned, they just left a lot of the historic features are in place, and they use some of that as, pedestrian infrastructure and lookouts, and let's see something else. But it's an interesting place to go, because one of the things that happens with dam removal, it does open up real estate in new places. And so I certainly see lots of kids, my kids, that love to get over into that island when they can. And one of the pieces of feedback that we've gotten from lots of people in terms of planning for the public landing, and as commentary about this, is can we finally figure out a way to get pedestrian connectivity between the public landing and Harbor Park, without forcing people onto Main Street. And they kind of did this in an interesting way in Machias, and but then it was really like a restoration of the falls. Like it took away the dam falls, but it restored like the natural historic falls, and we have a lot of the same geology.
May I just?
Sure, yeah.
So I just wanted to, for the record, I don't know how other trustees feel, but as far as a passageway, you've talked about this passageway from the park to the public landing behind the businesses. Like, I don't see that as any of my business as a trustee. Like, I don't see that as my call. Does anybody disagree with that as a trustee? I don't know where my place is there.
And your thinking is based on the fact that we're responsible for Harbor Park, full stop,
Yes, correct.
not a connection with the park to anything else.
Yeah, but I feel like I'm responsible for the park as it was designed by the Olmsted brothers.
I guess I would agree with that.
Well, if I can jump in just to say that the original design of the Olmsted brothers was what they really emphasized was this place of solace and quiet and a place to reflect and away from town. And they said that a number of times when they talked about the design for the park. So, I guess my question would be, does joining Harbor Park to the public landing, does that go along with their original philosophy and design for this park? And I'm not sure it does. But I think that that's something for us to consider.
I'll say that I don't really have an opinion one way or the other about joining them. I agree with Marty that that's not really actually what we should be looking at
I could,
as far as Harbor Park. And I also think since this park was originally designed, things have changed a lot. I mean, populations have increased and town has spread out. And so what used to be a secluded park is, full of picnic tables that hundreds of people go to every day. So I don't personally see the park as a spot of solace right now. I see it as where kids roll down the hill and people eat lunch at picnic tables and music plays and things like that. So I think it already has changed a little bit from the original design.
I think improving access.
So, but like Mark said, I also agree that I think it's more the town.
Mhm.
I don't have an opinion one way or the other, whether I think I would like that or not like that, but yeah, I think that's more of the whole design. And I think that the library needs to concentrate on the Harbor Park portion.
I think access to the park is important for it to accomplish its and Mrs. Bach's goals. And I think I would vote yay or nay on a walkway based on the landscaping and the aesthetics of it, rather than whether it existed or not.
One thing to keep in mind is that there were hard boundaries at the time of the Olmsted design. So we don't know how Mrs. Bach or the Olmsteds would have designed the park if they didn't have to work around the dam. That was a boundary of private property that needed to be maintained for a hydropower project at the time. And so one of the big things that's been emphasized in a lot of the Olmsted workshops is that not all, lots of things have been learned, and that the way that, and I think we certainly heard from some of the Bach descendants too, there are changes in the way different people would think about these things in 2021 in the face of climate change and what we know about rivers and what we know about all of these things. It's difficult to know how any of them would have designed things, knowing what we know today. But so we'll go through some of that. I don't think just behind the businesses would be necessarily what the bridge would be looking out. You know, there would be possibilities to turn, the dam itself, and if portions of the dam were to be left in order to accommodate. I mean, right now, the average person, when people go to Harbor Park, they are climbing on the town's dam a lot. Like that seems to be an attraction, to be able to get out up high and look out. Whether or not that's part of that was, I don't think, part of the original vision for Harbor Park, but people are doing it a lot. So,
and I guess particularly the area that Marty, you were talking about, I mean, that if that area can be preserved and it's appropriate to, maybe, is that an appropriate area for that pedestrian connection as well?
There are some places where it just is like a lookout, it doesn't go anywhere. Just in much the same way that somebody would climb on top of the dam right now to be able to look out at the harbor from a higher vantage point. Like this is the Sheepscot River, so that was maintained, but they didn't then try to make it possible to get over to the other side. I guess that's kind of what, we're asking maybe for input on a little bit. Is that a deal breaker if there were, not that there's any kind of deal reached here? I know we're not that close to that, but a lookout point, if the dam were to be removed, that would serve some of the purpose of what, the dam structure is currently doing. Is there any thought on that?
That's not really part of the library's purview, but personally, I think it could simply make the area that much more interesting, particularly if a run of, if the sea run fisheries are reestablished. It could be a very interesting place to watch them come upstream.
Right.
Can I ask, how far out are you looking here? I mean, even where we stand now, it will not take much sea level rise at all to flood Atlantic Avenue with storm surge and a high tide on top of it.
Right. One thing that we did just learn that I know had been a question of yours and mine a lot before, Sylvia, too, is the Main Street Bridge replacement. That is another factor, I think, in all of this. And
I guess,
go for it, Audra.
Yeah, to give this group some, an update on that, MDOT is looking at 2024 to start the construction on that project. So they haven't finalized everything, but what they're anticipating is that they're going to do some work on the superstructure of the bridge. So that would be the abutments, as well as they're hoping to remove the pier from the center and then reinforce the abutments, and that'll make them a little bit wider, but they're going to be removing that center pier. So that'll sort of open up the channel, and then they're going to redeck the bridge.
Do you know what sort of sea level rise numbers they're working with?
They're working with the Maine Climate Council report. So I just highlighted this before the meeting.
Well, they're not, sea level rise wouldn't be the issue for them. They're looking at base flood elevation and what, because of state and federal laws, they're not allowed to do anything to increase flooding risk, and they need to decrease it, which is why they're going from the bridge that's you know, has the partition in the middle,
Right.
to one that doesn't, which would also be much more aesthetically pleasing. One of the things, if anybody's seen when that dam gets opened right now, because of the fact that the dam is there, it's trapped a lot of sediment. It doesn't look good at all. There's all kinds of stuff down there. And so, you know, one of the things is that they're going to have to, in order to be able to do work on that, that the dam is going to need to be open during this whole time, which is what happens anytime that any of the businesses, any of those buildings need to do work on their buildings. They put in a request to have the dam opened, a request that is often in conflict with the desires of some of the other building owners who would like it to be closed up as quickly as possible so that the, you know, the pool can, you know, be in place of this mud pit. But as many of these buildings need to do substantial like structural work, and we have big projects like this Main Street Bridge thing that will be at least an entire winter of work. If we don't want to be looking at a mud pit of old oil tanks and tires, you know, it's something to think about, because it does make a lot of sense to try to time this with or slightly before, or certainly in coordination with that Main Street Bridge replacement. I mean, that'll be a massive situation with
Yeah.
trying to redirect traffic.
There are a lot of structures too, a lot of the buildings around the bridge and around the impoundment of the dam that are directly tied into, like their foundations are directly tied into the bridge. So that's all going to have to be addressed at the same time or prior to.
Right.
My question about, I realize the state isn't taking sea level rise into account in this specific project, but my question had to do with the long-term viability of Harbor Park, because I've seen some projections that show Harbor Park essentially underwater at certain times, given a little bit of sea level rise and a severe storm surge and a high tide, which makes me wonder, I mean,
Right.
if we think about the future of Harbor Park, we have to take this worst case scenario into account.
Yep, that was something in the document that you guys sent us, which was, I think, it was the group consensus was that to plan for 1.5 feet of sea level rise. And I do think that's a good point to bring up, because we're working on that kind of stuff with the public landing too. You know, is making it a little bit better okay? Or is it important to, you know, create a design? Do we want it to be, you know, 50 years, 100 years? Do we want it to be a design that, you know, has like a phase 2 that we know we could go into if we, you know, if the worst case scenario were to happen? I do think there's something to be said for the town of Camden and the library trying to be a leader in terms of like setting a good example for what, you know, for science-based decision-making and planning. And so when we do things, you know, it should probably be in accordance with respected recommendations. That we've been using the Maine Climate Council benchmarks, which is to.
So that's, I can tell you what that is. So commit to manage for 1.5 feet of relative sea level rise by 2050, and then 3.9 feet by 2100.
That sounds familiar, yeah. Have you seen Steve Pixley's shack? Did you see what he's painted on there?
The
Oh,
water,
that was the watershed school.
yeah. But I think that, council recommends prepare to manage for 3 feet of relative sea level rise by 2050 and 8.8 feet by 2100.
Yeah, I think one of the pieces of feedback that we had gotten before too was wanting to see designs that show like visually what, you know, what does this design look like during the type of, storm event that, where we see some of the flooding currently with Harbor Park? Or what would this design look like with, under a storm surge scenario, or,
If we have 8 feet, or if or when we have 8 feet of sea level rise, we're talking about a new library, never mind Harbor Park.
right, I mean, having a staggered granite tiered seawall all the way up to Atlantic Ave probably isn't what we're, there does have to be we have to stop
Need to
somewhere.
live our lives in between and enjoy the park.
Right.
Sorry, I thought somebody else was going to say something. So we've kind of skipped around, but I think it's good because I think that we've got kind of pretty good direction on sort of the, like what you'd like to see in terms of the seawall and that kind of area where, the sluiceway in that corner and how that's going to affect the park. So, I mean, we can certainly, try and reach out and see if, we can get you some conceptual drawings of what that might look like. Cause I think that would be helpful because hopefully we can get together again and kind of go through this a little bit more. But I think that, sort of given that time is running out for today, would it be preferable to everyone if we tried to schedule another meeting where we can kind of follow up on some of this stuff and maybe by then we could have something prepared that takes into account some of your feedback so we can use that as a jumping off point for our next discussion?
I just wanted to say one thing before we go to that question, and that is, so we've given you feedback on one design concept.
I would even say it's more like one element. Yeah.
Like, this isn't what we want to see. I mean, it's just like, this is what you asked us. We answered the questions. It doesn't mean this is like what we want.
No, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's the hard part about all of this. It's really, we can talk about it, but it's all kind of hypothetical until we've, kind of been able to get something rendered that gives us like some sort of idea of what it could look like.
I've just always dreamed about being able to have somebody in one of these meetings that can do quick little sketches, even if they're not engineered drawings and they're not going to, stand up to structural analysis, but just like somebody that can do some quick sketches. I also don't know if maybe it would be useful for us to have a meeting or just whoever of us wanted to get together, just actually down, in Harbor Park on site, just to throw around ideas and notice things, or if anybody wants to do that.
I think that's a good idea, Allison. I think Marty, who is the avatar of Mrs. Bach, ought to be there.
I think that's a great idea. I think we can all learn from that and see where some of these benchmarks are.
Yeah, and sometimes some of this is easier to talk about when we can sort of point to things and look at them and understand on the ground how it all kind of fits together.
Mhm.
So do we try for that, for a follow-up to all of this?
Wednesday at 1 works for me. That's an easy day for me.
That works pretty well for me also.
After September 5th, I'm gone until October 1. So if I'd like to do it before then.
Yeah, when are we looking? Because mine depends on whether school's in session or not in session.
Yeah, good point.
Same. So would not September, a week from today, the 25th at 1 as a as a follow-up work for everyone. So we can try to have you some sort of rendering and then hopefully meet on site to talk about this a little bit more.
That day's open for me.
Works for me.
I got garbled up. You got garbled up there. So we're talking about the 25th, Wednesday, 1 o'clock meeting at the park.
Yes. Great. All right. Matt, David, Nikki, is that good
Yep.
for you? Great.
I cannot join you. I have senior officials training in Knox County, but I'm sure you guys can do just fine.
Oh, maybe Mark or Sophie will be back.
Yeah, I think they're both, well, yeah, they'll both be back by then. So we can have somebody else come and pinch hit for Matt. Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And we will see you again at 1 o'clock on the 25th. And I will, if I get anything between now and then, and I'm not certain that how much work can be done by the landscape architect that's working on this project between now and then. But if I do get anything, I'll make sure to send it to Nikki to distribute to you folks on the Library Board of Trustees.
That would be great.
So this this meeting was live on YouTube, but does that mean it was also recorded?
Yes.
So the local media can, if they're not already watching and listening, they can report on this.
Oh, yeah. Susan was aware of the meeting and she's probably watching.
I think there were some really strong points brought out here that I'd love to see in the papers.
Absolutely. All right. Well, again, really appreciate everybody's time. It was incredibly helpful for me. And I think it's going to be, really helpful for everybody else that's working on this to have that feedback. So I will try to get you what I can before Wednesday. And if not, I'll see you then. Oh, sorry, Kristen.
Just a quick, where are we actually meeting? Because the park's pretty big. Are we meeting in front of the library
Let's put it out in front of the library and then maybe
or at
On
the
top
dam?
of
or
the
what?
dam. Oh, no, we're not supposed to do that.
yeah, maybe we start out in front of the library and we can sort of wander down to, a little closer to the, that edge of the dam.
So next Wednesday at 1 o'clock in front of the library.
Yes.
Okay,